Welcome everyone. Myself and we have Brenda Combs here today to also talk to you about just the why behind what we do and what it is that is really the meaning behind all of this. And so we're going to look at several things in regards to that. And the topic is Special Education 101, just a backdrop, and it never hurts for us to review, and as Brenda and I were putting this presentation together this week and last week, we're having discussions, and it's always good. Brenda, who is our regional director for compliance, has 39 years of special education experience. Myself and we tell you that not to brag, but to say we've been doing it a long time. And we still last week, as we were reading through some of this stuff, we'd say, oh, that we hadn't talked about that in a long time, or we hadn't thought about that way. And then myself, Denny, my name is Denny Paul May, and I'm the due process consultant, and I work with Brenda quite closely to provide as much compliance for our region districts as we can. And so, and this is my 34th year. And so it never hurts to go back and refresh. It never hurts to go back and look. We got some folks that are brand new, I'm sure, with us today. And we've got some folks that have varying levels of experience. And so we wanted to just talk about the why behind special education. But Brenda Combs is our regional special education director. And I'm just going to let her speak to you just a minute about what we're going to try to accomplish today.
Welcome, everyone. We're glad that you are here. And again, this is just a Special Education 101. It's not going to be anything that's going to be over top of your heads or anything of that nature, but we want you to know the history behind special education, where it came from, and the different types of laws that has been amended. So you all will get a better understanding of those laws. And I know you all are very busy, but sometimes on your spare time, or maybe in the summer, it would be really good if you could just look at the laws, look at the Federal Register, the federal regulations. It's really the code of regulations. So, but to look at those and understand those a little bit better, and then look at the Kentucky regulations. And just, you don't have to look at the whole entire thing. Just look at the special education portion of those. And that will help you understand that the laws and the regulations a little bit better. And it helped me as a teacher. I went into those and worked with those regs and tried to get a better understanding. Some of them, it's like reading Greek, but after a while, I actually understood those better, and makes me a better teacher. And then, of course, as I became the director, I understood that as well. And now with this position, you better know it. So anyway, just to help you all understand those better. But the history is vital for you to know, because you need that understanding. You also need the understanding of some of the lawsuits that have come about because of some of the things that have been done or not done. So, and we're going to be talking about those. So I'm not going to go into any of that kind of thing, but we just want you to know that this is just a basic special education review. There's little to do here. We'll get Denny Paul going.
Okay, so just a little bit of an overview here, kind of our learning intentions for the day. And one of the things that Brenda said that I really love is, if we're teaching our students, it is very important that we establish the why behind the things that we're doing. We make connections for them. So, when you connect things for students, that's one of the problems that students with disabilities have, is making those connections between, everyday life, practical applications and those types of things, organizing their learning. And so as we look, as we put this together, we were thinking, we want to really think about the why behind some of this good stuff. And we also talk to every group that we talk to. We share this. We have Dion Bates on here with us, and she is one of our leads, one of our directors, regional directors of special education, and she handles the instruction side. And then Brenda handles the compliance side. And then we all work under them to help provide the best resources we can for you guys. And the residual effect of that is getting some growth for our students, what's going to move the needle for our students. But it's really good to just kind of go back and kind of reflect and maybe think about some of the classes we've had, maybe think about some of these topics, and just have a real good little discussion. Now, when we talk about instruction being included with compliance, or compliance being included with instruction, we say we seek a balance. And so we're seeking a balance in our classrooms, but we're seeking a balance between making sure that our paperwork is correct, and then also making sure that we're doing things that are needed to be done for specially designed instruction, so that the needle will move for our students. We're in the business of educating, and so we want to make sure that we're doing that. And so I'm so fortunate to have both Dion and Brenda with me today. In this session, we're going to talk about the history of IDEA. We're going to look at FAPE, which is a huge concept that we have to understand, and we have to try to apply that to everything we do with IEP development. We're going to look at some of the SPED laws, some of the things that have emerged over the time, some of the things that you may not know about the history of how we got to where we are. And, you know, some of this is really recent history. If you're in my age group, you know, the 1970s, I was going to grade school, and some of this stuff was just starting to really take root in our country. And so the whole idea of not excluding folks, the whole idea of including our students who have minor or major differences, it doesn't matter. But every one of us have differences. Every one of us have things that we do well and that we don't do so well. And we need supports. We need help. There's times, lots of times on our own staff, you know, I'm reaching out to Chastity, or I'm reaching out to Dion, or I'm reaching out to Stephanie or Doug. Please help me with this technology, you know, because it's not my forte, right? And so we all have things that we do well, but you know, we're human beings, and we want to make sure that we, you know, everything we do from KVEC is rooted in inclusion, and that we're not excluding anyone, that we're treating folks the way we need to be treating them, and that we're giving them every benefit of the doubt and every opportunity to be a successful student within this KVEC region. So, you know, really have a love for what we do. And we want to try to be resources for you. But we're gonna jump right in here, and we're going to talk some about the history. We're going to talk some about the law. Brenda and I are going to bounce back and forth together, and we're going to try to provide you with the best hour of Special Education 101 as we can. And so I think right here, Brenda, if you want to just kind of introduce kind of like a definition here of special education, I'll be turning it over to you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so when we're looking at special education, we're trying to find a definition, and we could have a definition that is a mile long, but we broke this down and to let you all know exactly what you all need to be looking at and those things. So the first thing we must have is we have to have specially designed instruction for the student. Now, this is what the teacher actually does. It could actually be just some methodologies for the teacher. The student may need explicit instruction, direct instruction. You know, those types of things are what we need. And that is a must if you're going to be in special education. That is one of the pieces that we had to complete on that IEP. That is a must if we're going to be in special ed. And then, of course, the next thing is the supplementary aids and services and related services. I don't want to forget the related. These are the things that the student has to have. So these are things, you know, a lot of people list the accommodations in there, which is okay, because we know sometimes they will be in a co-teaching class and they might need some type of accommodation. And we need to have that in there as well. But sometimes I look at some things and I see like, well, the child works at a very slow pace. And if the teacher has 20 problems, you might want to reduce that down maybe to 10. That's also something you can put in there for the child. And also you can do for assessments. These kids, they can't do all these problems in that specified amount of time. So we may want to put in there modified, you know, for the assignment and the test. And sometimes the regular education teacher might want to do that, but most of the time, I'm just going to be honest, it is a special education teacher that does that. So those and in the IEP, we have to support that gap closure. What we really try to do is, we know that they are on a a pace lower than the regular education students, and sometimes a lot lower than the pace. So what we're trying to do in those, the goal is we're trying to just move that gap in as close as we can, because we want those students to make progress. And what worries me is sometimes I do see the goals through the academic piece and those types of things, but then I don't see a functional goal if a child needs a functional goal. I'm not saying every child needs one. So don't go around saying, I got to put a functional goal in my IEP. No, you don't have to. But if a child needs that, we need that in there. And then we need to make sure that everything is flowing. So when you're looking at your goal, you're reflecting back to that present levels, because that is where you're getting your strengths and your concerns, those types of things. And the concern is what you're going to be writing your goal about. So, you know, everything flows as you go through there. And we just need to make sure that those components are in there, your A through F components. We'll go through that later. I'm not going to start it now and have to repeat it later, but we have to make sure we have those components in there. And then in the present levels, it also talks about your transition. So we know we start with students at age 14, and we'll talk about that again in a few minutes, but we need to make sure that at age 16, and sometimes we're having to do this at age 15 because a student may turn 16 in that IEP time. So we have to make sure that we had that transition completed and we had those assessments, those types of things, so where we can understand what type of classes the students might need to fulfill what they want to do in their post-secondary goals. So we need to make sure we have all those connections in there. We also need to make sure that those goals are ambitious. We want to make sure we look back at that present levels and we see what level that child is on or what skill that child is on. So if they are reading on a 3rd grade level, then we want to make sure we write the goal for another year up. So it'd be on the 4th grade level. We want to make sure that it is has vigor in there. We don't want to give them something that is too easy for them. We want to close that gap. And the only way we're going to close that gap is to get that ambitious goal in there. We also need to make sure that the parents understand all of these things, that we have parent involvement in the IEP, that we ask the parent, what are some of the things that you would like for us to work on with your child? And I want to tell you one thing, telling time, counting money, those functional goals there, what I was telling you that we leave out sometimes, you know, those are some of the things that I hear from parents that say, you know, I would like to have those things incorporated in that. And then you can incorporate that stuff in there. But special education is very, very broad, the definition is, but these are some of the things that are broken down to help you.
You know, Brenda, when I reflect on my own career and I look back as being a very young classroom teacher, don't seem all that long ago. It's been quite a while, but it doesn't seem all that long ago. But one of the things that I wish I had known that I take away from this slide is the purpose of the IEP. What is the purpose behind the IEP? And how do we, what are we trying to achieve with the IEP? You know, the IEP is a year document. You know, we have to review it annually. If the child's not making progress, we have to circle the wagons and make some instructional changes. That's the purpose of progress monitoring. But I really, you know, I miss that functionality piece sometimes. You know, I thought it's more geared toward academics, and it's really not just academics. And we find, depending on what disability category you are placed in, you know, it really is going to be vital that we include that functional piece for our students. Because yes, academics are important, and yes, gap closure is part of it, but it's not all of it. And so that functional piece, that piece that, you know, like the other day, you and I were having a discussion about an orthopedic impairment student. A student has a physical disability. Well, sometimes when you have a physical disability, it may not impact academics as much. You know, the student may be mentally you know, meeting most of those benchmarks, or you know, they look commensurate with their peers. But you know, are they able to function? What's the daily living like? What are some, and is there an adverse effect? Because when you're talking about that, you can't really overlook that. And then when you get to the high school age, and of course you tack on post-secondary transition, and it becomes the focal point of the IEP. And then you continue to work on gap closure, you continue to work on functionality and support post-secondary transition so that our students, we set them up for success and not failure as they leave school, and then they're beginning to become, sufficient or self-sufficient or, supported adults. And so, that it just struck me as I was looking at this and listening to you so eloquently tell us about what special education is. I just wish I had known all those years ago as a brand new person, how that really worked together. And so I think it's very important that we look at that, and then we'll talk later about some of the other things that are on this page that kind of go with, the FAPE discussion and the Andrew case and all the things that we've learned in the last few years. So here's just kind of the backdrop of the history of special ed. I'm going to tell you some things. There were some disturbing things that went on in our country from the 1900s on. We started seeing some documentation of things like ugly laws. If you had a disfigurement, you could not be on the streets of Chicago. That's about 1905. That's on the books. They were actually referred to as ugly laws. So those people were excluded from being in public. Okay, if you move on forward to the 20s, you start to see the onset of the origin of species and the Darwinism and all the strong will survive. And the thinking was that, we needed to be more careful about the genetic engineering that was taking place in our country. And so there was a court case that came about as a result of a young lady getting pregnant in Virginia. And it went all the way to the Supreme Court. This young lady was in foster care. She became pregnant out of wedlock, which was a real frowned upon situation back in those days. And the foster parent's nephew was the culprit, and she was very young. She had some intellectual disability, and the state of Virginia not only looked to abort but also sterilize this young lady. And the Supreme Court actually passed the sterilization laws in 1927. Oliver Wendell Holmes made a statement. He was the Supreme Court justice, and he said, we've got enough people with intellectual disabilities. We need to kind of curtail that. We need to curb that. We all know that's wrong. We know that human beings all have differences. And so as we talk about this, we continue to move through, obviously the Nazi occupation of Germany. The first people that were killed in the Holocaust were not just Jewish folks, but they were also the first line was folks that had disabilities, the people that they saw as being different, that they didn't understand or didn't want to take the time to understand. And so as we move on to we saw the polio vaccine, we saw veterans come back from World War I, World War II, and we were faced with these challenges. These people that went to war were healthy and seemed to be somewhat intellectual individuals when they left, and when they came back, they had all kinds of problems. What do we do with them? And then we also had the emergence of the civil rights in the 60s. And so by 1973, people with disabilities were shouting to the mountaintops. They were taking over buildings. They were looking at all kinds of things that were going on. And they were saying, we're not taking anymore. You've got to make these buildings accessible. You've got to provide us with the opportunity to go to school. You've got to make curb cuts in those sidewalks so we can get the wheelchair up, and it will benefit everyone, the baby stroller and the like. Someone pushing or pulling their wagon with their little child in there. It benefits, that universal design really benefits everyone. But we started seeing the laws start to emerge. 1973, think 504 protection, think overall, think umbrella, think about the law said here, if you get federal funds, you will not discriminate against people with disabilities. So that started our crusade and our programs. Well, 1973 gave a far-reaching protection for people with disabilities. It was more in the lay. It wasn't in the education realm as much. It was just an overall, if you're disabled, we've got to make accommodations for you. We've got to put you on a level playing field. And so the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, signed by President Nixon, said just that. And of course, you know, when federal legislation comes out, it takes a long time for it to trickle down. And, you know, the country was very different back then. The exchange of information was a lot less. And it was very slow in coming. Legislation in 73 provided for the establishment of voc rehab services with special emphasis on service for those to meet those with the most severe disabilities. And Brenda, I see you bubbling. I see, did you have a comment?
Bubbling?
Yes. Did you have a comment about all this stuff that I've been
No,
talking?
I was actually thinking about, you know, it was more about the students with the severe disabilities, because that really showed, you know, the public could see that more than they could with the ones that didn't have as significant disabilities. I'm a 60s baby, so I lived through that time as well. And I could tell you some horror stories because I'm not from here. I'm from Houston, Texas. And I did live in a subdivision of about 300 homes. And my family was the only white family that lived in there. But we were treated as if we were their brothers and sisters, and was very fortunate to live next door to a football player that helped me learn to play football, Alan. And you know, I lived through that. I lived through the riots. I lived through a whole lot of that bad stuff. I lived through the part where they transported because they wanted to make sure that they had equal blacks and whites in the schools. So instead of me walking 3 blocks to school, I had to either ride my bicycle or walk 1 mile and 3/10 to school, having to go across a major highway. So, you know, I lived through those days and the fightings, and it was horrible. You know, the blacks against the whites, those types of things, including Spanish people as well. So, you know, it was a horrible time to live through that. And I hate to even think about it when I think back. And I hope we never had that again. But I'm gonna stop there because I'll start preaching now. But that's what I was really thinking about.
And that exclusion, Brenda, that exclusion of students, you know, the students that had the severe disabilities, they didn't allow them to come to school. They couldn't go to college. That, you know, whether they were intellectual enough to handle the college load, they were not allowed. They were just excluded. But the feds started saying, and schools, public schools are getting federal funding. If you're going to get our federal funds, you've got to make some accommodations for students, and you have to start opening your doors. And it was a slow process. And then they said, well, okay, we're not really addressing the education piece. And by 1975, they passed Public Law 94-142, which is in all of our textbooks. And, you know, if you go back to the first special ed class, the introduction you had, there's always talk about Public Law 94-142. And that occurred in 1975. And it was the education for all, and look at this language, for all handicapped children. And we now say children with autism, and we do people first language. And we're very sensitive about that. And we're very careful about our language. And so we always want to take into consideration the empathy piece that we need to have for every person. And so required public schools to evaluate and, along with parents, create an educational plan that would mirror non-disabled education. So this really opened the doors for IEPs. Think IEP here. Public Law 94-142, we start to see services being provided for students. Now, again, this was the very baseline. This was the very starting point of starting to see education through a different lens. We're going to hit these differences. We're going to work on these differences, and we're going to do a plan. Now, we've seen resource rooms all day long. We've seen separate classes all day long. We've seen co-teaching. We've seen a lot of things over the 39 and 34 years that Brenda and I have been involved. But what we want to take away from here is that we're starting to see these things along with the civil rights movement. We're starting to see students with disabilities start to take a forefront in the services that are being provided in schools. And so 1990 comes along. George Bush, the first Bush president, George and Barbara, they had a person in their family that dealt with dyslexia. And so they were very adamant about getting the 1990s, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, which really has dominated most of what we know about special education. It replaced 94-142, and it became the law of the land in terms of an act that is going to put into place a focus on individuals and improving their post-secondary or post-education opportunities. So you saw in 1990, transition emerged. We realized they're in school. What are we going to do for them to set them up for success after school? And so the 1990s, you know, had some pieces in there that the public law 94-142 did not have. We started looking at co-teaching models. We started looking at the beginnings of RTI. And so lots of things began to emerge in 1990. And then we continued on. And Brenda, you can stop me if I get to going too much and say, just interject. But, you know, 97, IDEA received significant amendments. The definition of disabled children expanded to include developmentally delayed children. And we know in Kentucky, we have 14 disability categories as a result, not 13. Like you'll read lots of times there's 13 disability categories, but this is actually a disability category in Kentucky, and it's for children 3 through 9. And we look at those developmental components that you may have heard somebody giving a Battelle test, and we look at, you know, those the cognition, the motor, social emotional piece, yeah, and right on down the line, you know, the communication and all of those things that go into being developmentally delayed. So that emerged in 97. And also then it started to require parents to attempt to resolve disputes with schools through mediation. Mediation became part of our procedural safeguards. Just in 1997, you have a dispute, you first go to mediation. You try to settle it with a mediator that the state will send. Of course, you know, we tried not to have those disputes, and we try to settle those disputes within our own districts before we have to go to KDE and ask for a mediator. But that certainly became a part of the law in 97. And then the amendments authorized additional grants for technology. Assistive technology became a big piece. And we started to see the internet emerge here. We started to see school look a little different. Everybody's on a computer. Everybody's doing their IEPs on a computer. We used to do the handwriting, and we have the knots to prove it on our fingers from writing those things so many times and so long, those documents. But you also started to look at, you know, preschool was a big part of the 97 push. And we started to get state-funded preschool, disabled infants and toddlers. Parent training and professional development also became pieces of the public law now referred to IDEA as 105-17. And so that's not as as much celebrated because we just refer to IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And then right on through in 2004, IDEA was amended again, and it added, you know, it added some things, and it was the Improvement Act, and it really lined things up with No Child Left Behind in 2004. You know, presidential politics takes some of precedence in this whole game because that's how acts and laws are passed. And so it's just really, really important to understand the history behind this. And we started to see, you know, this inclusion of every student having the opportunity to be tested, whether it be alternative or an alternate test or an alternate assessment, an alternative diploma, or whether it be, you know, just a regular assessment, a state assessment. This law here, the Improvement Act, kind of lined things up. You started to see the emergence of highly qualified teachers and things of that nature. And so more concrete provisions relating to discipline of special education students were added. We started to see manifestation determination reviews come about. And, you know, we know in general that you cannot suspend a student beyond 10 days outside of school without providing services, without, you know, parent consent, and without looking at that disability and saying, did that disability cause that behavior, or was that behavior just behavior? And so a lot of those things came about in 2004. And then, of course, in 2008, the American with Disabilities Amendments Act was signed into law. That you saw the reauthorization of 504 law, and you started seeing us to have reading and writing and math be a part of 504. Not just learning. They kind of expanded the list of impairments that were covered in 504. And later we're going to talk about the difference between IEP and 504. So just hold on to that. And then 2009, following a campaign promise for funding with the Individuals with Disabilities Act, President Barack Obama signed the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, or ARA, and it provided additional funding for students with disabilities. So had lots of things have emerged, and that brought us up to the recent times. So I'm just going to take a minute here to allow Brenda, if she will, to just talk a little bit about what we do to try to blend these two pieces together at KVEC. We got the instruction side, Brenda, and we've got the compliance side. And I think Brenda and Dion have provided tremendous leadership in regards to making sure that neither of these become more important than the other, but they work hand in hand with one another. And the goal is to do some things. And so I'm gonna turn it over to Brenda, let her talk to you about FAPE, and then I'll talk about a little bit about the engagement cycle.
Okay, so, and he's right, compliance and academics is 50-50. If you don't have one, you can't have the other, if you know what I'm trying to say. It's just that we have to have it that way. If you try that, it's going to, and without one or the other, you're just going to fail and fail the student. And we don't want to do that. That's not our jobs. Our jobs is to make sure that these students get everything that they need and that we help them in every possible way. So when you're looking at FAPE, that's a free appropriate public education. So, this is no cost to the parent. And whatever the child needs, like Denny Paul was talking earlier with this technology, we have to have, if the student has to have that, then, that might be a must. But you just can't say, well, my student needs this. Well, we have to have some evidence, and you have to have documentation as to why that student might need that. If sometimes we think they might need something, and then we get something, and then it don't work. All students need a communication system. If they are nonverbal, they need something. So, and again, a big fancy system, may not work for that child. It may be pictures. So, we have to look at that and see what that child really needs for that purpose. But, they must not graduate without that communication system, because what are they going to do when they get out of school? Who's going to understand them? Frustration comes into place if you can't understand a child. And then we punish them because of that. So we don't want to do that. We want to make sure that we provide them with that. The F, and we will be going through these pieces here. And I like it when Denny Paul's actually training this in face-to-face. He does some real interesting things and gets the teachers, really up on their feet, and they love it. But anyhow, the F is free, and we've already talked about that. Now, appropriate, and I'm not going to go into depth because later on, Denny Paul's going to talk about the more in-depth appropriate. But we have to, like I talked just a minute ago about the communication system. What is appropriate for that student? It may not be appropriate for the same child that's sitting next to the child, the student that has a disability. But so we have to look at what is appropriate for that particular child. And then, of course, the P is public. So you have free, appropriate, public. And then, of course, your E is going to be the education. So we have to educate every child that has a disability. That is law. We have had, and Denny Paul will go over some things in a minute about some lawsuits that have been out there. So I don't want to go into depth about that. But, education is very important. If you don't get that proper education and the teacher slacks, that child can graduate from school, and that child can come back and sue you personally. So you don't want that. You want to give it everything that you've got to try to help that student as much as possible. Keep that child engaged, just like it says their engagement cycle. Yeah.
So thank you, Brenda. I really appreciate that. And when we talk about technology and some of the things that you were talking about, the communication system, that is that's so
It's vital.
so vital. You think about the residual effect. If you can't communicate, you can't have access to the general curriculum. If you can't communicate, you can't get your wants and needs met. If you can't communicate, you can't keep yourself safe. So we really have to think about our student population, and we have to be more intentional about that. And, you know, if you have intellectual disabilities, not just the low incidence group, but if you have intellectual disabilities like mild mental disability is considered an intellectual disability, you have to really look intentionally at assistive technology and that communication piece, because that is a functional piece of being educated and allowing people to have a quality of life. And if we're not taking care of that, we need to be thinking about that and really making sure that we make that a part of our IEP development and our services that we provide for our students, more importantly. But, you know, I talked a little bit about both sides of the fence, Dion doing instruction, Brenda doing compliance. And we're going to kind of model for you here just for a few minutes. What if we were going to teach this to an in-person class, and we had a bunch of activities running, you know, because of time, we don't have time to go into depth. So I'm going to kind of run through it pretty quickly. But the whole idea of engagement is to get response up. Our good friend, John O'Connor, who's been with us many times in the past few years, has talked to us, and he's written chapters in books about how important it is to have students engaged, how important it is to get their response, how important it is to get them to think, to talk, to write, rewrite, reconsider, think metacognitively about what they've just done, and to put it in some type of organization, be able to throw it against the wall and make it stick, so that, you know, we can transfer it to other classes, we can transfer it to other learning, and we can take it with us. It becomes permanent. So the more engaged our students are, the less we have behavior issues, the less we can expect to have to reteach. And, you know, the whole time we're engaging these students, we should be on our feet, moving around, teaching from our feet, not from our seat. Now today I'm doing this virtual thing, and I'm having to sit down, and you can see all this movement. I'm kinesthetic, you know, I'm a mover. I got to move to process, and I got to talk to process. So you got to find out, you know, what makes those students learn. And part of the engagement cycle is getting them to respond to you, and then being able to check for progress, checking through formative assessment, checking every day. Are they getting it? Are they understanding? Now, you don't have to take a grade every day. You don't have to take a data point. We talked a lot about data points this morning, but you've got to check for understanding. You've got to check to see that the kids are getting it and repeat it. So, you know, when we talk about specially designed instruction be a big piece of our IEP development, one of the things I think we got to think about is engagement. And so I'm just going to kind of model here for you. If I was teaching this, you know, I might just break this word down, this acronym. You know, that's the other thing that we can't overlook, is getting the language across to you, you know, making sure that we all understand the common language of special education. Acronyms are so huge and so big, a big part of it. And so we just thought we'd start out with FAPE, and we would, you know, model that a little bit. And Brenda's already broken it down for you, but I'm just going to hit it again real quick. So I might pose this question to my students. What is FAPE? What is FAPE? Can you break it down? Can you define each word? Can you even come up with each word? And I might even scaffold it a little further if I put, you know, I looked up here at free, and I said I might put an R under the F, and I might put a P under the A, and I might put a U under the P, and I might put a D under there to try to help them get the words. If maybe they don't know the words, or, you know, what's the definition? What does this mean in real time? And then I would have them like work on that in what we call a silo by themselves with no help from their neighbor. I might number them and say, you're a 1 and you're a 2. If you've had my training before, you've seen this done, right? And I might have those 1s and 2s responding to one another with their, you know, their answers. They may be learning from one another. We have mixed ability groups. We want, you know, we want all mixed ability groups. The research says 6 to 8 kids in a group, and mixed abilities is what really moves the needle for them. So why wouldn't we do it like that, right? And so, but then I would say, you know, hey, let's take each letter and let's write down what we think it is. And then when we get it written down, ones, share with twos what you think it is. Twos, tell them what your answer was, because everybody's going to be doing it. So ones and twos are sharing with one another. They're talking to one another, having a conversation. Then they're going to rewrite their answer. If they learned anything, if they picked up something from somebody, every time I work with Brenda, I pick up something every time, you know? So what I'm saying is mixed ability groups can really matter. You know, someone may have a little more expertise in a particular area. So it's really important that we force that engagement in our classrooms as we learn new concepts. Then we let them rewrite their answers, and we don't let them off the hook. We don't say, hey, I'm going to call on you, or I'm going to call on you. We say, hey, anybody might be called on to share to the whole group. And so that's kind of what we do. So if we broke free appropriate public education down, I'm going to run through this really quickly and just go ahead and tell you what I came up with. Free means the government pays for the education, no cost to families. Now there may be, and this is for students with disabilities. Okay, keep in mind, students with disabilities, free means the government pays for the education, no cost to families. Now, if there's some incidental costs to going to school, like locker fees and things of that nature, now you still have to come with that, right? But what we're talking about is anything that's going to assist in implementing and reaching the goals on the IEP going to be paid for. Any of the things that student needs through assessment, it's going to be free. Okay. Then we get to the A piece, and the A is for appropriate. If a student qualifies, they get an IEP. Okay. They get a document, and they get a basic floor of opportunity for success in the old days. Okay. And we're going to come back to this. Okay. So don't be confused by that statement. They get a basic floor of opportunity for success in the old days. All right. And then P, public, means supervised by the public school system. A team puts together an IEP and helps decide what the student gets based on the needs. And it's all supervised by the public schools. The public schools get money to do it, so they've got to provide it, right? So every student with a disability gets this thing. And then the education is, obviously, E is for education, and we can include special ed, related services, counseling, and even transportation. So did you know that understanding FAPE through the Andrew F. Supreme Court case is fundamental to most everything we do in special education now? You can't go to a national conference. You can't go to a state conference. You can't have a conversation in a task group. You cannot have a conversation in a school with special education professionals without this being a highlight or the backdrop of everything we do. So let me tell you the story a little bit here about Andrew. Andrew was a young man who was autistic. He had some significant disabilities. He had some significant behavioral problems. He had some things that he focused on with intensity, I guess is the best way to say it. He had a fear of going to the public bathroom. He had a fear of things spilling off the table all day long. He had a fixation with a timer because they'd used a timer early on to do some discrete trials. They'd tried some ABA with him. And he was one of these students that if you turned your head, he would run away. He was constantly trying to elope from the classroom. He was constantly trying to get to the timer that he'd fallen in love with. And he had some real fears, some real fears that they had to overcome. Well, he went to school at public school in Colorado. And remember back here when I said in the A part that out in Colorado, they were just given a basic floor of opportunity for success as far as the substance of the IEP was concerned, because it was based on the Raleigh case that had previously gone to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court had basically said, you only have to give a basic floor of opportunity, a minimum is all you have to do in an IEP. And we all knew that was wrong, right? We set high expectations for all students. And so Andrew was the kid who was going to challenge this. He was going to challenge this basic floor of opportunity because he went to school at 3 and they actually did an IEP for him, and they kept copying and pasting the IEP from year to year. They kept doing the same old thing and getting the same old result. My dad used to say that's the definition of insanity. And so they were doing the same old thing. They were writing the same exact goals. They were copy and pasting from year to year. They didn't do a functional behavioral assessment, Doug. They just did some things. They tried a few things with ABA. They had tried to remove the timer from him. They'd done just some minor kinds of things, but the goals were basically the same from year to year to year. And so the Indra case went to the parents said, "Hey, man, our student is getting bigger. Now he's in the 4th grade. He's much more difficult to deal with. His behaviors are getting worse. We know you can't stay the same. Your behaviors are going to get worse if you don't work on them." And so parents said, "Hey, we're going to enroll him in." He also had a fear of flies, and they enrolled him in the Firefly Behavioral Institute in Colorado. I think it's in Denver. And it's so ironic that he had a fear of flies, and they enrolled him in this Firefly institution. And so they enrolled him, and first thing they did was a functional behavioral assessment. They looked at the behaviors that were occurring before the real maladaptive behaviors occurred, and they were looking at what happened after those what was the function of what was he getting out of his behavior, and they started to design a behavior intervention plan. And guess what? Over that summer, his behavior improved. And so the parents went back and said, hey, he has a sibling that goes to this school. We want him to come back to the school, and we want you to provide these services in keeping with this IEP that they've developed, this behavior intervention plan. And the school system said, basically, no, we're not. We've provided him with a basic floor of opportunity, and we're not going to give you anything else. And so they said, well, we don't really want to sue you, but we're going to get an attorney. And so they got an attorney, and the attorney said, where's the data? Where's the progress monitoring? They didn't have any progress monitoring. They didn't have any parent input into the development of the IEP. They did not have any different goals from year to year. They didn't have any vertical lines on their progress monitoring. They didn't even have any progress monitoring. They didn't have any instructional changes based on progress monitoring. They didn't check on this child to see if he was going to progress. They didn't come back to the table with the ARC meeting. They broke so many fundamental rules that it was so interesting. But they kept the 6th Circuit where we are. This was the 10th Circuit out there. The 6th Circuit already was taking care of some of these things, but the 10th Circuit was not. And they were applying the same old rally precept of law to this case. And so this guy knew, because they didn't have any progress data. They couldn't say that they'd done anything with this kid. He knew that because they had failed to do progress monitoring, they didn't, and because they had not had any ARC meetings, they'd not done anything to change the way they were addressing his behavior based on data, that he was going to continue to challenge it. Well, the 10th Circuit just kept saying basic minimum floor of opportunity. He got all the way to the Supreme Court. Long story short, 2017, Justice Roberts said that's given no education at all. So the Indra F case became the case that we look to tell us what is appropriate for students with disabilities. And so here's what we learned. So we're going to redo A here. All right. Appropriate is redefined. And Brenda is going to talk to you about that.
Okay, so there we figured out there's about 4 pieces of FAPE, and the 4 pieces that we thought were relevant, and especially in this case with Indra, we have unique circumstances for student needs. We are all different, so we all have different needs. Well, so we need to make sure that we address those unique circumstances for all students. And then the ambitious goals that we talked about just a minute ago. And, again, I'm going to reiterate about the functional goals, because those are the pieces that we're leaving out. We're forgetting those things. So we need to make sure that we address those functional goals with these students that need those. And then if their academic goals needs to be ambitious as well. We need to make sure that we're not giving them something that they already know. We want to build on their learning to make them prosper in class and through their grades. So we have to progress monitor. We have to see if they're making progress. If they're not making progress, why? What do we need to change to cause that? We are all different. We all learn different. So we need to make sure that we're giving each individual child the way that they learn best. So we need to progress monitor for that purpose. And then parent involvement. It plays a big role in that. And I understand sometimes that, and I've lived through this. I taught elementary, and when I taught elementary, most of the time the parents are right there. Okay, then I taught middle school too. You know, it sort of slacked down to about 50% of the parents came about that time. And then by the time high school rolled around, we hardly ever got any parents. You know, very few parents came to the meetings. But we need that parental involvement. So, and I know this day and time with all this COVID and all this stuff that's coming up, you know, we're doing maybe a Zoom meeting or just a conference call or however we can get in touch with that parent. But we need to ask those parents some open-ended questions, because number one, when they are there in person, where are we? All the teachers, the ARC chairperson, all of us are sitting on one side of the table, the parent sitting over there by themselves. And it just looks like, you know, we're against each other. We don't need to be doing that. We need to sort of mingle around to where they fit in, because remember, the parent is part of your ARC membership. So we have to have the parent involved in what we do. And once you can get them in, then they will become more involved once they see that you're interested in them. Right now, they're, you know, they feel like they're scared. They're scared to say anything because they don't know what to say. So sometimes we have to have some open-ended questions just to ask those parents, just to get them involved.
Okay. And Brenda, you know, you hit on a huge piece of this with the parent involvement, and you explained it just the way it happens lots of times in our schools. We don't want to generalize too much, but really we can see parents becoming less and less involved as students get older. And so we got to try to do everything we can to get parent involvement. And, you know, one of the things that we say, you know, on the record review, we look at that. It asks, did the parent provide input? You know what I'm talking about, Brenda? I think it's item 39 or something like that, or somewhere in that neighborhood. But at any rate, did the parent provide input into the development of the IEP? And so we say, you know, do everything you can to get them to tell you what they think the student needs to be working on. It's hard to argue with something you help develop. And so that's a big piece of it. And then, you know, the other overarching idea here is, you know, we have standards, and we're going, you know, we have rollout of standard. We've been having a rollout of new standards all year long. Standards come along as standards started to emerge nationally. And it was right around 97 when we started looking, oh, you got to do standards-based IEPs. Okay. The standards kind of guide us, but the standards don't provide us or tell us exactly what we're supposed to be doing with those students. Those are only guides or benchmarks that we need to try. You know, there's sets of skills that are interconnected from grade to grade. And so I've even said this from time to time, this Andrew case kind of flew in the face of standards-based IEPs. Not really, though. The standards guide us, but we look at real data. We look at real assessment information to determine what the student needs. And we have to come up with a way of providing that through their unique circumstances. So that it kind of taught us we can't clump it all together. We can't copy and paste. We can't copy and paste pieces of the standards into our goals. And we've talked about this a lot, but this is one of the most important things to understand. And so these are the big four that emerged from Andrew, and it's so important that we understand this is the backdrop for everything that we do. Unique, ambitious goals that can be progress monitoring that informs whether the student's making progress, that we've actually implemented the things that we say we're going to implement, and then also informs our teaching. Are we being successful? Do we need to back up and punt? And then do we have the parents involved? So children are apt to live up to whatever you believe of them. IDEA, and the Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act. There's 6 pillars. Brenda's going to talk to you about the first 3, if she will so indulge me, and I'll talk about the last 3.
Okay, so when we're looking at the IEP, you know, this is it's a roadmap to the student's educational program that's designed to meet the child's unique needs, educational as well as functional. And then the people that actually determine all of this is your ARC membership, which is your parents and your educators, which includes your regular education teacher as well as your special ed teacher. And then if you have related service people, you know, they need to be at the table as well. OT, PT, and speech, because we need to make sure we design this IEP as so it will be appropriate for that child. And I said appropriate intentionally because I wanted you to make sure that we do design it appropriate for that particular student.
Okay. Number 2, we've already hit this one hard.
Oh, we've hit that hard. We might as well skip that.
Yeah.
Just for time purposes.
So they're getting their education regardless.
Right. So the next one is your least restrictive environment. Be sure that we are placing these students in the least restrictive environment. We need to do what's right for the student, and wherever that student needs to be to get that education, we need to do that. But with the least restrictive environment, we have to make sure, you know, when you look at this, it says integrating special needs students into regular classrooms to the maximum extent possible. Yes, we want them to be around non-disabled peers as much as possible, but if it's not helping them, then we need to make sure we go down into a resource class. That doesn't mean that they can't go into a regular classroom, but then they can also be pulled because they might need those repetition of skills. They might need more intense instruction. You know, sometimes special ed students is ashamed to raise their hand in a regular classroom to ask a question. So we need to make sure that we're doing what's best for that child before we get an in-through case.
So appropriate evaluation is a big piece of the idea. And I put an exclamation up there instead of an I, because I don't know at the evaluations that we've looked at lately. We really need to be checking these evaluations. If you don't understand that evaluation, call us. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about it. But appropriate evaluation that's in that student's native language. There's some language in the law that talks about you know, not discriminating based on who they are and that kind of thing, and making sure it's, you know, appropriate. Parent-teacher participation, we've talked a lot about that, regular, consistent, and cooperative communication between parents and educators, all a big piece of FAPE and IDEA. And then the procedural safeguards. When you hear that phrase, we're talking about parents' rights, okay? And there's a 32-page document that you have to give once a year to those parents, regardless of whether they want it or not. And it talks about their rights and their responsibilities and the mechanisms by which they may review progress, be involved, and mediate disputes. Get that? That came out of that law that we talked about earlier. And then, did you know that Part B is for children ages 3 through 21? IDEA's 2 parts. And then Part C are those kids that are birthed through 2 up to 3. And so when you hear us say we're transitioning from Part C to Part B, that means it's a 3-year-old that's been in first steps, and they're going to get an IEP if they're eligible by their 3rd birthday. So that's a big piece of the education. I'm going to run through several slides here quickly because we're running out of time. Child find is a big piece. If you know of a student that has a disability, you have an ethical responsibility to bring that to the table. And I'm just going to say that. And free appropriate public education is for ages 3 through 21 in Kentucky. And it's very, very important that we understand that if we have knowledge of someone that has a disability, we need to investigate. Very interesting acronyms. This is kind of Brenda's thing right here. So Brenda, you talk to him a little bit about the breakdown.
Okay, so very briefly, you see OSIP there, and that is the Office of Special Education Programs. And yes, that is the United States Department of Education. This is the top-notch federal people that OSIL, the middle one there, has to answer to. So Office of Special Ed and Early Learning Services is what that acronym stands for. So they have to comply with OSEP, with those indicators. You know, you see us out a lot, having to do record reviews, those types of things. Well, you know, if Kentucky is not doing what they need to be doing, you know, OSIL has to send in data to OSEP, and then OSIL can be put on a corrective action plan just as well as your school district. So it just trickles down is what happens. And then of course you have us, Kentucky Valley Education Cooperative. And then the next thing, you have your member districts. So this is just like, you know, stair steps. You know, you got your member districts, you got KVAC, you got OSIL, then you have OSEP. That is just some facts that you might want to learn about us and those little acronyms. OSIL used to be KDE. OSIL is now taking its place.
That's perfect. And so we have more vocabulary. It's very important that we understand that our students need to understand vocabulary, just like we feel like you guys as our colleagues and as our students need to understand this language. So we got IEP, LRE, SDI, SAS, FBA, BIP. Hey, it goes on and on and on. And one of the things I do in my class with the regular ed teachers is I teach them about acronyms, and I teach them the language of special ed. So make sure that you make it your business to know what IEP means and FBA means. I've got a few up here just as an example. We've got the eligibility forms here. There's 14 disability categories. These are the 14 categories. And they're also sometimes acronymed, if you will. MMD, mild mental disability, FMD, functional mental disability. What does SLI mean? Speech language impairment, orthopedic impairment down there in the middle. You know, and then what I've got here is a hot link that takes you to KDE's website, and down this row right here, there are forms. There, like, let's look at the autism one. Okay, real quick. Okay, there it is. Okay, so you know, that is where you would, when you're doing eligibility, you would fill this form out every time. When you reestablish eligibility, you fill this form out every time. So very, very important that we are able to do what we need to do with that. Okay.
And on that, it says before age 3, you know, we need to make sure we document that stuff because sometimes, you know, we might, and I hate to say this, a child might get in the 6th grade and they try to place the child as autism. You know, we have to look at those, and as that form says, you know, it should happen before age 3. You should see.
That's a good point, Brenda. And you know, there's going to be certain category characteristics. I couldn't get it out. There's certain characteristics you're going to see. You know, if a student's in the ballpark of being on the spectrum, they're going to have some communication difficulties. They're going to have some fine motor difficulties. They might have repetitive behaviors, whatever. But these forms are right there.
Problems too.
Yes, they're right there for you. And you know, socialization, you know, awkwardness and that type of thing. So you know, it's always good to understand. And I always tell people when I'm doing ARC chairperson training, if you have a disability, know that disability before you go in that meeting. Know what the characteristics look like. And if it's a rare form of some type of medical diagnosis, know what that is. And so that you can be the professional in that ARC meeting. I tell the chairpersons that all the time. And so with eligibility, who's eligible? Any child 3 through 21 that has an impairment and needs special education and related services and has an adverse effect. Those are the 3 rungs of eligibility. Of course, you know, you've got eligibility referral. You must have proper reading and math instruction in tier 1. You must move through the tiers of intervention and show little to no progress. If a referral is made to special education, you then have to determine before you take that referral, what's a suspected disability, and then ask for consent to evaluate that student in all the areas of suspected disability. You know, and there's a 60-day timeline that goes with that consent. And there's a 3-year timeline once you get into the special education program that's going to, you're going to have to reevaluate. If you get a parent referral, don't delay that parent referral just because that student may be at a certain tier in RTI or MTSS. Make sure that you don't ever say, well, we've not done any RTI on him. We can't take a referral right now. That is a violation of the law. Okay. All kids are supposed to be in a tier, either tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3 by law. And you have to say, well, they're in this tier. Well, we'll continue the tiers. We'll go through and we'll intensify the interventions as the referrals being done during that 60 school day timeline that accompanies that consent for a new referral. ARC meetings have these folks. The 3 on the top are required members. Okay. You can have a annual review without a parent. You can excuse a related service provider. You can have a meeting without an outside agency, but you can't have one without a district rep, a special ed teacher, and a regular ed teacher. And if you're in the situation where the culture is such that you're having clandestine meetings, and what I mean by that, one teacher's down the hall, the other teacher's down the hall, the ARC chairperson down the other hall, and then you write everything up and you go get signatures, you can get yourself in a lot of trouble. But the 3 across the top are required, and the others are encouraged strongly. And if you invite them, you have to document why they're not there if they're not there. Okay. Parents are a little bit different. We have to notify them 3 times. We have to follow due process of law, 7-day notices. We do have quite a bit more information here. And but anyway, we've got the KVEC coaching tool here that goes deep into these pieces of the IEP. We've got the Iep Guidance Document that talks about LRE. I would encourage you to review this information and write your LRE statements to match your services page. I would also encourage you to think critically about the time that you put in your services. If a student's got 4 goals and they only got 15 minutes of service, it's hard to implement that. Okay. And I'm not preaching. I'm just saying we got to make sense with these IEPs that we're writing. Okay. And page 59 helps us to see some examples along with making that present level. Making the LRE match the services page and then match the continuum of placement option in the LRE that Brenda talked about. And as we restrict, we got to think about what the ramifications are. And if there are some strong ramifications, we got to address it. Okay. Then you got IEP and 504 and the difference. 504, think if I'm teaching, if I got my toddler, if I got my grandbaby, Olivia, in the pool and she can't swim and I put swimmies on her, that's an accommodation. That's 504. But if I teach her to swim, that's IEP. I'm going to turn it back over to Dion. I wish we could get through the rest of the information. I think there's about 10 or 11 more slides. It's there for you. You can review it. If you have questions about it, there's things like confidentiality in FERPA. There's accommodations and modifications and the difference between those. And then there's some information about class size and caseload that we didn't get to. And I apologize. Sometimes I get a little wordy. Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, Dion. Thanks all the staff, Doug Smith, Stephanie Kidd, Chastity, Kraft, and all the cool cats that work out and hang out with us at KVEC.
Thank you, Denny Paul and Brenda Combs. Denny Paul May and Brenda Combs. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.